If there's one question that I get as a vintage reseller all the time, it is, how do you know what is worth picking up when you're looking at all the rows in Goodwill and at all the junk? How do I know which item is going to sell? Hi everyone, Andy here. I'm a vintage home decor reseller, and today I'm going to teach you how to identify whether or not something is valuable. Now this video is going to focus exclusively on vintage home decor, although you can kind of use these tips to evaluate really anything. So if you're a new reseller, this is going to be very helpful for you, or if you're someone who's used to selling like modern stuff like remotes or stuffies, things like that, and you want to get into vintage, this is also for you. Okay, so let's jump right in. The very first thing that I do is try to figure out who made the item, because who manufactured it and where it was manufactured, like the country, usually helps indicate whether or not the item is valuable. Okay, so the easiest way to identify who made it is to look for a maker's mark. So I have a piece of mid-century pottery. It's Italian. I saw this on the shelf in the thrift store and I liked it, and then it wasn't until I turned it over and saw that it was made in Italy, and I know it's very hard to see, that I realized, oh my gosh, this is a very valuable piece of vintage mid-century pottery. And so that's how come I picked it up. So the maker's mark is very helpful in determining whether or not something is valuable. So maker's marks are oftentimes on the bottom, they can be inside, they can be on a label. Sometimes it's a teeny tiny stamping. Obviously for artwork, it can be a signature on the bottom. Sometimes artists will sign the back or even inside the canvas if it's sealed up. You just have to kind of go on a little bit of a hunt and see if you can find anything that would identify who made the piece. Where the item was made in terms of the country it was manufactured in also can make the item a little bit more valuable depending on where it was. Like things that are manufactured in Europe, let's say if it's like something mid-century from, one of the Scandinavian countries, or if it's something from France or Italian pottery, there's certain countries that have particular different styles that are actually now very popular and collectible. And so the fact that this was made in Italy and other things will maybe stamp this as like made in Italy, and maybe a little bit more valuable because people tend to put a lot of value on items made in Europe because most things today are made in China. So another way to identify who made an item is to educate yourself on that particular category. So if you love like vintage glass or Pyrex or pottery or other types of vintage collectibles, they probably have a book on it. And an example would be like, I am really into mid-century furniture and mid-century designers, and so I will pick up coffee table books like this and I will flip through the pages and look for the different types of furniture and stuff were manufactured during that time, and that will help me identify whether or not what I'm looking at when I'm at the thrift store might actually be valuable. Another thing I'll do is I'll pick up books that are period specific. So like this was like decorating ideas. This is like, I believe from like the 1970s. And so when I flip through these pages, it will show me the different things that you will find in that time period. And then when you're at the thrift store, especially if you weren't born in that particular era, you can be like, oh, I remember this from this book, so I know what these items are, and therefore I know that they may be valuable because they're like from the mid-century era, and like mid-century is something that's very collectible. Final way to identify who made the item is to actually join a Facebook group that is dedicated to that particular item. And I know you're probably thinking, Andy, there's Facebook groups dedicated to collecting vintage things and identifying vintage things, and there are Pyrex Facebook groups, there are glass Facebook groups, there are Facebook groups dedicated to so many things, and these people are like very much collectors. They probably have all the books that tell you every item that was ever manufactured by that particular person, and they love helping people identify the pieces. So if you join these particular groups and you can post an item, someone might be able to tell you very easily like this, like, oh, that was produced in 1956 and that's a unique colorway and that's therefore valuable. And another good thing about being in these groups is when you find an item, usually people are collectors, and if it's something that they would want, you may have a buyer immediately in that group and you don't even know. So that's another reason why to join these groups, is not only will they help you identify the piece that you have, but they also might be interested in purchasing it. Okay, so one more thing I'm going to tell you before we move on to the next way to identify if something is valuable is to make sure that you are using the Google Lens app when you're out thrifting all the time. So basically, snap a picture of anything that you see that you think that could be valuable, because that can really quickly help you, like this, identify whether or not it's something of interest. That is what I did when I saw this piece out. I snapped a picture of the actual piece, I snapped a picture of the bottom, and that helped indicate immediately in the store that this is a piece that was worth picking up. Just make sure when you're snapping a picture that you take the item away from all the chaos onto somewhat of a like a blank background or the floor. Take a picture at different angles, because sometimes, you know, the app is not great. Sometimes it's like it finds the item really quickly, and other times it can take a few different angles and positioning to where there's nothing else around it before Google will actually be like, oh yeah, this is what it is. So just kind of tips in the store. It can be kind of annoying to kind of walk with the piece and try to find a place that's like easy to use, but it's definitely worth doing that, because if it doesn't find it the first time you snap it, try a few different angles and usually it can find it. The next way to figure out whether or not something is valuable is whether or not it's collectible. And we kind of touched on this a little bit when we were talking about Facebook groups. There are certain types of things that are collectible, and therefore you're always going to have a buyer for it. So sometimes whether or not it's collectible ties back to the actual maker, and other times it just is like the whole genre that this particular item falls into. So example of something tying back to the maker would be like Pyrex. Obviously there's one company that makes Pyrex, it's Pyrex, and therefore, you know, there's collectible pieces within the Pyrex product offerings. An example of like a genre would be, or a time period would be like things that are mid-century. You know, there were tons of mid-century makers, but that particular era of design was very, very popular. So the type of collectibles that I typically pick up are tonala pottery, that's pottery made in Mexico, cloisonne vases, which are like brass inlay vases, Native American pottery, so your Navajo pottery, your Acoma pottery are examples. These are things that I pick up. Glassware, if you are into glassware, there's definitely very collectible pieces within vintage glassware, particularly swung vases. I know nothing about glassware, but I know there's a lot of glass girlies out there and they lose their minds over fairy lamps and other things, which I still have yet to find my first fairy lamp, thank you, which I'm like, when is it gonna be my time? But these are examples of like collectible pieces, so it's not necessarily the person who manufactured them, although that helps, but also just like the genre that it falls into, like native pottery, pottery made in Mexico. Cloisonne vases, there's probably several different types of manufacturers of these things, but that was a particular time period where they were making this particular decorative object, and that is collectible. Okay, so the next two ways to identify whether or not something is valuable are a little bit trickier, and I will try to walk you through them. So the first one is quality, and figuring out whether or not something is of quality is hard, because you have to really just go out there and handle a bunch of items to kind of figure out the differences and do a lot of compare and contrast. So as you go out and shop more, you'll get better at this, because you will start to identify things that are valuable through the other ways that I talked about, like who made it, whether or not it's collectible, and you'll see kind of the quality of those pieces, and then you'll start to identify other types of pieces that have a similar type of quality, whether it's the weight or the intricacy of the craftsmanship. Okay, so the last thing to think about is whether or not the item is on trend. So whether or not it aligns with interior design trends of that particular moment. Now you may be thinking, why does that matter? Well, something that is not collectible and is not necessarily manufactured by anyone special may actually be on trend, and therefore all of a sudden it's considered valuable and worth picking up. So this particular way of identifying value is probably the hardest for people, because not everyone is keeping up on interior design trends. I happen to, because I'm in the interior design space professionally, and so it's definitely part of my professional development. But if you are not, and you're trying to figure out like, hey, Andy, how do I even know if something is on trend right now? I can tell you a few tips. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is make sure you're downloading and reading all the trend reports that are available to you. The best ones, in my opinion, are Pinterest. They put out an annual trend report. It is phenomenal. I'll make sure I'll link it down below. And Etsy puts out trend reports throughout the year. They're very good too. Both have either vintage or home decor categories. And so what you see within that in terms of what people are searching for in terms of design styles or objects, that will really help you kind of identify what pieces in the wild, when I say in the wild, meaning while you're out thrifting, might be worth picking up because it aligns to that particular trend. Now I want to make sure when you're reading these, you're not just looking at the home decor search terms, although those are obviously your best things. Make sure you're also looking at what they're talking about for other categories like food, because food styling, people are going to need objects to do that. So if you're seeing that for weddings and you're seeing for food styling that these particular types of objects or pottery or serveware are really on trend, then those are the types of things you're going to want to pick up and put in your shop or booth. The other thing to look out for are the types of themes that like artists and makers are doing. An example is mushrooms have been so hot, and a lot of people, artists and makers, have been making mushroom things like crazy. These are all new things that people are looking for, but there's a lot of mushroom paraphernalia out there in the vintage world, canisters, needlepoint embroidery, you name it. And so that you may read that, oh, people like mushroom art, and realize, wait a minute, I saw a vintage piece of mushroom art at the thrift store. I'm gonna pick that up and put it in my shop. So you wanna make sure that you're looking at all the categories within these reports. Obviously, the interior design ones being the most specifically applicable, but like I said, you can find these very interesting nuggets of information that in other categories that can point to something that you might want to pick up. A few other ways to kind of keep up on stuff. Obviously, the more social media you consume that features interior designers and their work, and by work I mean their interiors, then that's going to help you figure out what vintage to pick up. And then also reading, articles. Like I always am searching like 2024 trends, 2024 kitchen trends, 2024 bedroom trends, and within these particular articles are usually information that I can use to kind of tailor my offerings right now. Okay, so you might be thinking, Andy, why don't you share some of these trends with us right now since you are up on them? And I will. So here are some trending things right now to kind of look out for based on what people are searching and people are decorating with. So anything Victorian, cottagecore, English cottage, that European look that celebrates like gold gilt frames, anything that has like rustic patina, that is a trend right now. So those particular objects, while they may not necessarily be made by anyone special, people are really going bananas for them. Mushrooms, like I said, are super hot right now, so anything mushroom, definitely pick it up because people are loving it. On the fashion side, anything Y2K right now is very popular, so anything that was manufactured and in style around like the late 90s, early 2000s, definitely pick it up because it's very popular. Of course, brass hardware, brass fixtures are still very popular in interior design, so your brass objects like your brass candlesticks, your brass trays, your brass animals, those things are still popular. Although I will say I'm starting to see a little bit more interest in silver, like silver and pewter specifically. So definitely keep an eye on that because I think we're gonna see a little bit of a shift from like the warm metals to kind of the cool metals in the next few years. Okay, so that's all I have to share with you. I would definitely love it if you guys would tell me your ways for identifying value in the comments below. If you're looking for more reselling tips, thrifting content between my videos here on YouTube, make sure you check me out on TikTok and Instagram. Thanks so much for watching, and I can't wait to catch you in my next video. Take care.